The atmosphere crackled with tension, a palpable hum that filled the opulent hall. Melania Trump had just crossed a significant line. With a cruel, calculated demand, she questioned Barack Obama's very essence of grace. But his quiet comeback, a single piercing question, disarmed her attack before she could fully land it. The evening had begun calmly, filled with anticipation. In a grand Washington, D.C. hall, warm lights cast a soft glow, mellowing even the sharpest edges among the nation's most powerful figures. Every seat was taken, every camera lens poised. This wasn't merely another political gathering, was an event designed to bridge the chasm between America's divided voices. At its heart stood Barack Obama. He approached the podium slowly, and the crowd rose instinctively, a wave of respect not just for a former president, but for the quiet strength that always seemed to emanate from him. As he raised his hands slightly, the applause subsided into a profound silence. There was an undeniable presence about him, calm, composed, yet commanding, that compelled people to listen before he even uttered a word. He surveyed the room, his gaze sweeping over familiar faces, some allies, some critics, but he offered a warm, inclusive smile nonetheless. Then, in his deep, steady voice, he began. "My fellow Americans," he said, "we find ourselves again at a crossroads." The hall grew absolutely still. His tone wasn't angry or loud. It was measured, thoughtful, like a craftsman meticulously choosing, each word not to impress but to genuinely connect. He spoke about the myriad challenges America faced, the escalating cost of living, the widening divisions across communities, the erosion of trust between leaders and the people. He highlighted families struggling to afford health care, young people grappling with uncertain futures, and senior citizens quietly fighting battles they shouldn't have to face alone. But Obama didn't stop at listing problems. He was there too. Remind everyone that America's strength had never been in its perfection, but in its unwavering resilience. "We've never been perfect," he affirmed, "but we've always been determined. Every generation before us faced challenges that seemed impossible, yet they believed in something bigger than fear. They believed in each other." As he spoke, the audience leaned in. There was no flashy rhetoric, no empty promises, just a quiet power that drew everyone closer. He recounted a story from his presidency about a single mother working 2 jobs who still found time to volunteer at her church. She had once told him, "I don't expect miracles, Mr. President. I just want to know that we matter." Obama paused, his gaze softening as the sentiment settled. Then he concluded, "That's what leadership should mean, making people feel like they matter." The words hung in the air, honest and weighty. A tangible shift occurred in the room. Even his detractors couldn't deny the sincerity of his message. He spoke of unity in a naive, idealistic way, but with an acknowledgement that people were angry and tired of fighting each other instead of confronting the problems that afflicted them all. He offered hope, but made it sound practical, something to be built daily through action and compassion. His voice deepened slightly as he declared, "We can't afford to forget who we are. Can't measure success only by what's good for the few. Our country's greatness has always come from the many." Every few sentences, applause rippled through the hall, gentle at first, then growing stronger. But Obama didn't pause for it. He simply continued, his rhythm steady, his message building layer by layer. He turned his focus to the future, speaking directly to the younger generation. Don't wait for permission to make change. Don't believe that leadership belongs to a certain kind of person. It belongs to anyone brave enough to care. This wasn't just a speech. It felt like a profound reminder of decency and calm strength in leadership. Even those who had long ceased to support him found themselves unable to ignore the heartfelt sincerity in his tone. Behind the scenes, organizers exchanged uneasy glances. This event wasn't meant to highlight such a stark contrast, yet it was becoming one. Obama's words, though not directed at anyone specific, stood in quiet opposition to the loud, often combative political style that had dominated under the Trump administration. As Obama neared his conclusion, his tone softened once more. "Our differences don't have to divide us," he said. "They can teach us. Grace isn't about who stands tallest. It's about who stands together." A long, meaningful silence followed before the applause returned, louder, fuller, echoing through the hall. It was the kind of applause that carried relief, nostalgia, and a yearning for something more stable, more human. Obama stepped back from the podium, offered a modest smile, and nodded his thanks. For a moment, the crowd remained standing, clapping, not just for a former president, but for a sense of dignity they hadn't witnessed in a while. But just as the moment seemed poised to settle, movement stirred in the front rows. A familiar figure rose, tall and composed, her expression unreadable. Melania Trump, impeccably dressed in her signature elegance, began walking toward the stage. Her heels clicked against the polished floor, each deliberate step echoing through the sudden hush. All eyes turned to her. Some expected polite words, perhaps a gesture of unity. Others, however, sensed something else entirely, a spark of attention. Not yet fully ignited, Mela took the microphone, her smile poised and practiced. The air thickened, and the tone of the night began its undeniable shift from grace to challenge, from unity to confrontation. No one knew what was coming next, but it was clear the calm Obama had painstakingly built was about to be tested. As Melania Trump stepped up to the microphone, the air seemed to tighten further. The applause that had celebrated Barack Obama's speech faded into an uneasy quiet. She smiled gracefully, her trademark expression, elegant, practiced, unreadable. Yet behind it, something sharper hinted that this would be no ordinary address. Her voice, calm and steady, filled the room. "Thank you," she began. "It's always a privilege to speak about the greatness of our nation, especially in times like these when America is shining again." The words were carefully chosen, but everyone understood the subtle jab. Shining again was a direct echo of President Trump's defining slogan. A polite applause rippled, though not everyone joined in. Melania's tone grew firmer. "Under President Trump's leadership, we have seen strength return to our country. We've seen our borders protected, our economy rebuilt, and our people respected again." Around the world, few heads nodded, mostly from Trump supporters seated toward the front. Others exchanged knowing looks, sensing the direction she was taking. Then her voice gained a subtly sharper edge. "For too long, America suffered from weak leadership. Our people were ignored. Our borders were left open. Our traditions were forgotten." There it was, the unmistakable shift. She wasn't just praising her husband. She was drawing a clear line in the sand, explicitly distinguishing his administration from the one preceding it. Her tone carried pride. Yet beneath it lay something colder, a quiet challenge aimed directly at Barack Obama, who sat mere feet away. Melania turned slightly toward the audience, her eyes sweeping the room. "We all remember what it was like," she said, "when promises were made but not kept, when America's seniors were left behind and our workers were told to be patient while their jobs disappeared overseas. That was the reality before my husband came into office." Murmurs rippled through the audience. Some shifted uncomfortably. Obama sat still, his face calm and unreadable. Melania pressed on. "This administration has brought back hope," she declared, her words sharp and deliberate. "We've restored pride in our flag, respect for our law enforcement, and strength in our economy. We are living in the best era America has ever seen." That final line landed hard, a bold claim that drew both applause and quiet disapproval. For her supporters, it was confidence. For others, it felt like arrogance. And then, as if to seal her point, Melania added, "It's easy to talk about unity, but real leadership is about results. It's about action, not speeches." The comment was not subtle. It was a direct jab at Obama, whose reputation for eloquent speeches had always been both admired and by some criticized. The tension in the room thickened, but Melania maintained her steady smile. She continued, "My husband promised to make America great again, and he delivered. Aid gave our veterans the care they deserve, protected our children's future, and he made sure our seniors were not forgotten." Yet, in her attempt to highlight her administration's successes, her words began to feel disconnected from the reality many Americans still faced. She spoke of prosperity, while countless families struggled with rising costs and uncertainty. She praised safety and strength, while communities nationwide grappled with division and hardship. The contrast was difficult to ignore. Still, Melania stood tall, her tone unwavering. She seemed to believe every word she said, or at least she wanted the audience to believe it. Her message wasn't just political, it was personal. It was about defending her husband's image and the legacy she believed they were building together. But what truly caught people off guard wasn't simply what she said, but how she said it. There was no warmth in her voice when she referenced the previous administration. Instead, an almost surgical precision characterized her description, as if Obama's time in office had been nothing but failure and weakness. "Before we came along, America was losing itself." She stated, "We were divided, uncertain, and forgotten. But under President Trump, that has changed. We are respected again. We are strong again. This wasn't merely criticism. It was an attack cloaked in grace. Polite words carrying the sting of accusation. The audience felt it. Some applauded hesitantly, while others looked toward Obama, wondering how he would respond. Melania's expression remained steadfast. She spoke of renewed faith, of American pride, and of a nation that finally stood tall. But she neglected to mention the struggles of ordinary citizens, the rising cost of living, the growing social divide, or the quiet pain of those still waiting for their greatness to arrive. Her words painted a picture of a perfect America, a picture few recognized. As she neared the end of her speech, Melania paused briefly as if preparing to deliver something even more significant. Her gaze shifted slightly in Obama's direction, though she never uttered his name. She said, "Some people talk about grace, about hope, about kindness, but grace is not just a word. It's how you act when you're leading a nation. It's what you do, not what you promise." The sentence hung in the air, its implication unmistakable. She was calling out Obama, suggesting his famous calmness and eloquence were mere performances, words devoid of results. It was bold, perhaps even too bold. When she finally stepped back from the microphone, the room erupted in uneven applause, polite from some, hesitant from others. She smiled, lifted her chin, and briefly glanced at Obama before returning to her seat. Her message had been delivered, confident, sharp, and unapologetic. But beneath the surface, something had profoundly shifted, warmth that had filled. The room during Obama's speech was gone, replaced by a strange tension, quiet electricity that no one yet dared to acknowledge. Obama remained silent, watching her with that same calm expression that always seemed to conceal more than it revealed. He didn't frown or smile. He simply waited. And though Melania had finished speaking, everyone in the room knew the conversation wasn't over. In fact, it was only beginning. What had started as a celebration of leadership was turning into something else entirely. Test of character, a clash of grace versus pride, and a moment that would soon spiral far beyond anyone's. Expectations. Barack Obama sat quietly as Melania and Trump took her seat. The room buzzed with a mix of reactions, a few approving smiles, some polite claps, and plenty of uneasy whispers. Her words had landed like small stones in a calm pond, each one sending ripples across the crowd. Everyone understood she hadn't just defended her husband, she directly attacked Obama's legacy. For a few long seconds he didn't move. Then, with that familiar calm confidence, he rose. The audience's chatter faded instantly. He didn't hurry, didn't raise his hand for silence, simply waited until every eye was on him. He began softly. "You know," he said, "one of the great things about this country is that we can disagree and still share the same stage." A small, nervous laugh escaped from somewhere in the crowd, breaking the tension for just a moment. Obama smiled faintly, but there was a profound weight behind his eyes, the kind that comes from years of carrying expectations, criticism, and the constant balance between patience and truth. "I've heard some strong words tonight," he continued, his voice even and steady. "It's words about greatness, about strength, about making America the best it's ever been." He paused just long enough for the audience to sense where he was heading. Now, I'll be the first to say, every leader believes they're doing what's best. Every administration wants to make things better, but the real question is better for whom? That question hung in the air like smoke. Melania's eyes narrowed slightly, though her polite smile remained fixed. Obama stepped closer to the podium, his tone still gentle, but now carrying an unmistakable firmness. Because greatness isn't measured by what's written on a banner or shouted at a rally. It's measured by the lives of the people who can't afford to be here tonight. It's measured by the grandmother who skips her medicine because her bills are too high, by the factory worker who puts in 12 hours and still can't afford to fix his car, by the teacher buying supplies with her own paycheck. He let the words sink in, scanning the audience slowly. Those people don't need slogans. They need solutions. Applause began softly, hesitant, then genuine. Obama nodded slightly, his expression thoughtful. "We can talk about pride and prosperity, but real leadership means facing the truth, not painting over it. And the truth is, America still has work to do. Always has, always will. That's not weakness, that's honesty." He looked toward Melania briefly, not with anger, but with quiet restraint. "It's easy to say everything's perfect when you're standing. In comfort, it's harder when you're listening to those who aren't." The audience was completely silent now, hanging on every word. His voice grew softer, almost reflective. I understand the desire to believe we've reached the best of times, but our greatness doesn't depend on one person, one family, or one office. It depends on how we treat one another, especially when we disagree. He smiled faintly, his tone warming. I see America's strength has always come from its people, from a president's name, not from a headline, but from ordinary citizens doing extraordinary things. That's the real story of this country. Then he shifted slightly, his tone taking on a sharper edge. Now, I know there's talk about grace, how a leader should carry themselves, how they should speak, how they should look, but grace isn't performance. It's not about who stands tallest or who smiles the longest. Grace is how you act when no one's clapping. A murmur spread through the audience. It was clear he wasn't just speaking generally anymore. His words were directed, not cruelly, but deliberately. He continued, "Grace is about compassion. It's about listening, not just talking. It's about lifting others up instead of tearing them down to make yourself look taller." He looked around again, his eyes soft but serious. We can't call ourselves great if we ignore the people who are struggling. Can't talk about grace while turning our backs on those who need our help the most. There was a palpable shift in the atmosphere, the kind that comes when truth meets pride. Even those who had applauded Melania's speech began to fidget in their seats. Obama's words weren't just countering her claims, they were gently dismantling them piece by piece. He leaned in slightly, his tone lowering, intimate yet powerful. "When I was president, I made mistakes, many of them. I didn't fix everything. But I learned that real leadership isn't about pretending to have all the answers. It's about showing up, listening, and being willing to admit when something isn't working. Because pretending everything's perfect doesn't help anyone. It just hides the pain of those who are suffering." A few heads nodded quietly. The mood in the room shifted from tension to reflection. Obama had managed to take the heat out of Melania's attack without throwing any back at her. It was reclaiming control of the moment, not through confrontation, but through grace itself, the very thing she had tried to lecture him about. Then he added, "We can argue about numbers and policies all day, but at the end of it, we all have to ask ourselves one question. Are we helping people or just helping our pride?" The words hit like a quiet thunder. No shouting, no drama, just truth, clear and undeniable. He took a breath and smiled lightly. "I know America's potential. I've seen it in every corner of this country, from the smallest towns to the biggest cities. It's in the teachers, the nurses, the farmers, the soldiers. It's in the people who get up every day and do their best, even when no one's watching." Then, with a voice that softened to almost a whisper, he said, "That's what makes America great. Not slogans, not speeches, but its people. And if we forget that, we lose the very heart of who we are." When he finished, the room erupted in applause, not wild or chaotic, but long and deep, filled with respect. It wasn't the sound of victory or triumph, but of profound understanding. Obama nodded once humbly and stepped back from the microphone. Melania's eyes followed him as he returned to his seat. Her smile was still there, but it had tightened slightly, a reflection of pride mixed with something unspoken. She had come to teach him about grace, but what she had just witnessed was a master class in it. And though no one said it out loud, everyone in the room knew the evening had just changed course. The applause that followed Obama's rebuttal slowly faded into an uneasy stillness. The room seemed to hold its breath, unsure what might happen next. For a few seconds, it felt as if the evening might end on that calm, reflective note, with Obama's message of unity lingering in the air. But Melania Trump wasn't ready to let it end there. Her expression had barely changed while Obama spoke, yet her posture betrayed something beneath the surface. Her chin was lifted a little higher, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Those who knew her well could sense her frustration, not just anger, but something deeper, pride. Then, with quiet determination, she rose again. The audience stirred, surprised. Few had expected her to respond so soon after Obama's speech. She walked back to the podium, every step deliberate. When she spoke, her voice was calm, smooth, but carried a new sharpness, the kind that hides behind politeness. "Thank you, Mr. Obama," she began, offering a small, cool smile. "It's always good to hear beautiful words about unity and kindness, but I think America is tired of words. America wants action." A faint murmur spread through the room. This was clearly not going to be a gentle reply, she continued. "You talk about struggles, about ordinary people, but when you were in office, where was that care? Where was that grace?" Her eyes didn't leave him. You'd speak of helping the people, yet you left them divided and disappointed. The crowd tensed. It was no longer subtle. Lanian had unequivocally turned the event into a confrontation. Obama stayed seated, his face still, his hands folded. His calmness seemed only to make her more restless. Melania's voice grew firmer. And now you speak about grace as if you own the word. But true grace, Mr. Obama, is not just calm speeches and nice stories. True grace is action. It's doing what others are afraid to do. It's standing strong even when the world tries to bring you down. She paused, letting her words hang pointedly. Then, with a chilling smile, she delivered the blow. Maybe you should show some of that grace, or better yet, show your original birth certificate. The words hit the room like a sudden drop in temperature. For a moment, no one moved. The sentence echoed in every corner. It was a familiar phrase, a cruel ghost from an old political war, one that questioned Obama's very identity, seeking to reduce him to something less than American, less than legitimate. People shifted in their seats, their eyes darting between the two figures. Some gasped quietly. Others stared at Melania, stunned that she would say it out loud. Obama didn't move. He didn't blink. He just sat there, his expression unreadable. Melania's gaze held firm. It wasn't a slip of the tongue. It was deliberate, meant to sting, to reassert power, to remind him that the Trump family still knew how to hit where it hurt. Then finally, Obama rose to his feet. The crowd's silence deepened. There was no anger in his movements, no trace of defensiveness. He walked to the podium with the same unhurried grace he'd always had. When he looked at Melania, his eyes weren't cold. They were calm, almost pitying. He waited a beat before speaking. Then, in a steady voice, he said, "When do you stop playing Barron's mom?" The room froze. No one clapped. No one spoke. Even Melania's composure slipped for a fraction of a second. It wasn't a shout, not an insult hurled in anger. It was a question, quiet, sharp, and deeply personal. Obama's words weren't meant to attack her motherhood. They were something else entirely, a mirror. He was showing her what it felt like to be reduced to gossip, to have something personal and sacred turned into public humiliation. He let the silence linger, then continued, his voice softer but firm. "You see, Melania, it's easy to throw stones when you think no one can throw them back. But grace, the real kind, means knowing when to stop, means choosing dignity over noise." His tone wasn't mocking. It was almost sorrowful, as if he regretted having to say it. Yet his message was crystal clear. The audience began to breathe again, slowly realizing the depth of what had just happened. Obama hadn't shouted, hadn't insulted. He had simply turned her own tactic back toward her, exposing the hollowness behind it. He continued, addressing not just her, but the entire room. "You can question my record. You can challenge my decisions. That's fair. That's politics. But when we start questioning people's identities, their families, their humanity, we lose. More than arguments, we lose ourselves." The crowd stirred, some nodding quietly. His words seemed to steady the air again. Obama looked back at Melania. "Grace isn't about winning a moment. It's about what you do when the moment turns against you. It's about how you treat others, even when they don't treat you kindly." Melania's lips tightened. Her eyes didn't meet his. Obama then added almost gently, "You say America wants action. You're right, but action without compassion is just power without purpose." That line landed heavily. It was no sound except the quiet hum of the cameras. It was the kind of sentence that would stay in people's minds long after they left the room. He gave a small nod, stepped back from the microphone, and returned to his seat. Melania remained standing for a few seconds longer, her smile brittle. Now, her posture still perfect, but her eyes colder. Whatever she had hoped to achieve, a moment of strength, a display of control, had slipped through her hands. Obama hadn't shouted her down. He hadn't embarrassed her with insults. He had done something far more powerful. He had reminded everyone watching what real grace actually looked like. And though no one said it out loud, everyone knew that the evening had taken a turn no one could have predicted. The battle of words had become something more, a test of character. And in that silent, heavy moment, it was clear who had won. The tension in the room didn't fade after Obama's words. If anything, it thickened, invisible, but heavy like the air before a storm. Every face in the audience registered a different emotion: discomfort, awe, disbelief. Some stared at Obama with admiration, others at Melania with a strange mixture of curiosity and concern. What had started as a night of political speeches had transformed into something else entirely, a moment that peeled back the surface of power and exposed raw ego beneath it. Melania stood frozen for a brief second before regaining her poise. Her chin lifted once again, her familiar smile returning like a mask, slipping back into place. She wasn't accustomed to being publicly challenged, especially not like this. Calm and control she'd always been praised for were slipping, even if only slightly. The cameras caught everything. The small twitch in her expression, faint narrowing of her eyes, the tension in her jaw. Then she did something unexpected. She turned to face Obama fully and said in a voice that carried through the entire hall, "You speak about dignity and compassion, but you are the one who hides behind charm and speeches. You act as if you are above everyone, as if you are the teacher of grace." The audience reacted with quiet murmurs. Her tone was no longer polished. It was edged with emotion, almost frustration. "You talk about families and respect," she continued, "but what about your own? What about the truth you never tell?" Her words hung dangerously in the air. Everyone could sense she was walking a fine line, but she didn't stop. Obama didn't respond right away, simply looked at her, his expression thoughtful. Then, in his same steady tone, he said, "Melania, if we're going to talk about truth, maybe we should all be clear about our own." That sentence alone caused a stir. Melania's smile faltered again, but she tried to regain control. "What is that supposed to mean?" she asked, her voice tightening. Obama looked at her for a moment before replying, "I'm saying that before you question anyone's identity, you should make sure yours and your family's is free of unanswered questions." The crowd shifted. Some gasped quietly, others leaned forward, caught between shock and fascination. It was the kind of moment that happens only once, when power meets vulnerability in plain sight. Melania straightened her shoulders, her eyes flashing. "You want to talk about families, Mr. Obama?" she said. "Then maybe you should answer the questions. People have asked for years. Show your real birth certificate and then we can talk about truth." It was a clear attempt to regain control, to throw the weight of the attack back at him, but Obama's response was immediate and sharp, though still calm. He said softly, "You know, Melania, it's interesting how quickly people reach for the same old tricks when they run out of honesty. You've said what your husband always says when he feels cornered. Accuse, distract, deflect. But grace doesn't live in accusation. It lives in courage." The room was silent again. His tone wasn't angry. It was disappointed, the kind of disappointment that cuts deeper than fury. Then almost gently he added, "You brought up family. So let me ask you, when does protecting your husband's pride become more important than protecting the truth? Do you stop speaking for him and start speaking for yourself?" The words hit hard. People glanced at Melania, who stood stiffly, her expression unreadable, but her eyes sharp and cold. She opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, Obama continued. "There are things," he said, "that people whisper about, things that don't belong in polite conversation. But when someone starts throwing stones, those whispers grow louder." He paused, then said carefully, "If you insist on turning truth into a weapon, then you should be ready for others to ask questions you may not want to answer. Questions about what's real and what's been carefully arranged." It wasn't a direct accusation, but the meaning was clear. It was a veiled reference to the long-standing rumors that surrounded the Trump family, the quiet speculations never confirmed, but always lingering at the edges of public conversation. The air in the hall grew thicker with each passing second. Lanian's smile hardened, her breathing quickened just slightly. Then, in a sudden move, she took the microphone again. Her voice was louder now, her words sharp. "You like to talk in circles, Barack? You act calm because you're afraid of the truth. You want to question me? Fine, but you show your real birth certificate and then I'll talk to you." The words came out like a final strike meant to end the exchange on her terms. She didn't wait for a reply. She turned sharply, lifted her chin, and began to walk away from the podium. The room stayed silent. No one clapped, no one spoke. The tension had reached its breaking point. But as she walked past, Obama's voice rose once more. "Quiet, steady, unshaken," he said. "And that's the difference between grace and noise." The words landed softly, but carried immense weight. Melania stopped, mid-step for a brief second, her back still turned to him before continuing toward her seat without looking back. The audience sat still, absorbing the gravity of what had just happened. Obama didn't gloat or smile, though. He simply stood there, calm and grounded, his presence alone restoring a sense of balance to the chaos that had unfolded. What he had said was more than a comeback. It was a statement about character, about how true strength isn't proven by volume or insult, but by restraint. He had shown that the quiet truth can echo louder than any accusation. When the event finally ended, the applause that rose wasn't for a political victory, was for something much rarer: dignity. People had just witnessed the difference between someone who fought to win and someone who stood to lead. And as the crowd dispersed into the night, one phrase kept repeating in whispers: grace and noise. Because in the end, that was what the evening had revealed. Two definitions of power standing side by side, one built on pride and defensiveness, the other rooted in calm strength. Obama left without fanfare, his composure unbroken. Melania, meanwhile, remained in her seat, silent and still, her face unreadable. Yet beneath that silence, she must have known. The moment she tried to teach Obama about grace was the very moment he showed her what it truly meant. What do you think about this exchange? Who do you believe showed real grace, Melania Trump or Barack Obama?